So hello everyone, in this video I will actually be going through the questions that you actually raised with regards to your final year exam. So we'll be going by topic. So the first part of the video will be about housing, followed by flooding, and finally we end off with geographical investigation. So without further ado, let's move on with the video. Alright, so we'll be talking about your questions related to housing. So these questions were actually raised by your friends through the Google form. So all of us can actually learn from the questions that they actually asked. Alright, so the first question is, how do I describe the concept of inclusive housing? So your friend's question here is not simply asking about how do I define inclusive housing, but rather how to describe it. So basically, you have to tell me what inclusive housing is. So aside from the definition, it is adding a bit more detail to the definition to describe the characteristics that you actually know about inclusive housing. So if you were to describe inclusive housing, it would sound something like this. So inclusive housing refers to housing which is affordable and can be purchased by people from various income groups. It provides facilities and amenities for all ages to cater to the different needs and develops a strong sense of belonging and place in the residents through creating pleasant memories and unique landmarks, or through unique landmarks is also acceptable. So you see here, I'm not simply saying the characteristics, but I'm elaborating a bit further about what these characteristics mean. So for example, affordability, I elaborate about affordability by saying that people from all income groups or from various income groups are able to afford it, and then I go on to elaborate the other two characteristics as well. So this is how you actually study when you're trying to describe the concept of inclusive housing. Alright, so we are done with this question. Moving on. What is the difference between causes and impacts of housing shortage? Alright, so for this question, it is quite clear because causes and impacts basically mean different things. So for causes, basically what is something caused by? For example, why does something happen? So for example, why does housing shortage happen? That is causes. So a way that you can try to remember this is fires are caused by loose wires, which means that loose wires result in fires. However, for impacts, it is what happens after housing shortage happens, for example. So what happens because of something. So fires are caused by loose wires, but fires do not result in loose wires. Fires results in deaths. So that is the difference between causes and impacts. So the difference here is that basically they are two different things. So housing shortage, for example, if we want to talk about the cause, one of the causes of housing shortage, it is caused by rapid population growth. But housing shortage is caused by rapid population growth, but it does not result in rapid population growth because rapid population growth is not an impact of housing shortage. Next, if we look at impact, an example of an impact is that housing shortage results in homelessness. Alright, so we see here that homelessness happens because of housing shortage, but homelessness does not cause housing shortage. So that is the difference that you have to be clear with when you are doing your revision. So I hope that this answers your question. Uh, Remember, at any point of time in the video, if you feel that I'm going too fast, or if you did not catch anything that I said, feel free to pause the video, move back a couple of seconds, and rewatch the different sections to make sure you understand everything that you're not clear about before moving on. Alright, so over here, it's quite a lengthy question. If the question asks for you to write what are the two other factors that lead to housing shortage, and we were to write high birth rates and migration as our answer, will we be able to get the full marks? Because you said they are a common factor. Yep, that is right. So over here, you need to know the difference between factor and explanations. Let me just elaborate on this. So factors that cause housing shortage, there are three: rapid population growth, competing land use, as well as limited land available. Explanations, however, are not factors. They tell you more about the factors. Okay, so for example, rapid population growth is a factor and it is caused by natural increase or migration. So natural increase and migration explains rapid population growth. However, they are not a factor. So when you are asked to describe two other factors, for example, you can tell me about rapid population growth and then explain rapid population growth with either natural increase or migration, but your other factor has to be either competing land use or limited available land. All right. So I hope that this actually answers your question, because students tend to be confused and they think that high birth rates and migration are two different factors. However, they fall under the same factor, which is rapid population growth. Alright, so I think we are done with this question. I hope that answers your question. If you have any doubts about my explanation, anything that is you're confused about, feel free to either text me, email me, and I will try to contact you. Alright, so why is having pleasant memories in certain places considered one method of inclusive housing? Okay, so this is a question that a lot of students actually ask. So if you were to go back to the definition of inclusive housing, it is housing that has these three different characteristics. A strong sense of place and belonging is one of the characteristics, right? So your question is basically, how do pleasant memories result in a strong sense of place and belonging, which is one of the characteristics of inclusive housing. So for example, look at the basketball court over here. I'm sure many of you have had very pleasant memories at the basketball courts near your home. So having pleasant memories at this particular area can create a strong sense of place and belonging. Look at the text over here. This is where I played with my friends. It is a place that I attach value to. So because of the pleasant memories that you have created at a particular location, it leads you having a strong sense of meaning to the place. You attach meaning to this basketball court as a place that you cherish, as a place that you want to protect. And therefore, it leads to this feeling of belonging, which is very important when you're trying to build inclusive housing. Because if you do not have a sense of belonging or meaning to housing, you will actually not really care about the housing, and then you will allow it to just deteriorate. So I hope that this answers your question. See pleasant memories as a method to achieve the strong sense of place and belonging, which is a characteristic of inclusive housing. Alright, so this question over here, what is public housing? It is actually in your textbook, however, I will just go through with you, and hopefully I'm able to shed some light on the topic. Okay, so housing units that are basically public housing are housing units that are equipped with basic services and is provided by the government at a reasonable price. So you know that your private properties, for example in Singapore, your condos, your terrace and your bungalow, they are not actually built by the government for the people, but rather they are built by private companies or private developers for people who are able to afford them. However, public housing, which refers to your HDB flats, is built by the government, and there are several subsidies which allows people to actually get this good quality housing at a reasonable price. Alright, so it's much more affordable, it has the same basic amenities, and is provided by the government. But private housing, on the other hand, for example, your condominiums, terrace, and bungalow are not built by the government, but rather they are built by private companies. Alright, so the next question is poor facilities or slums. I'm not really sure what the question is, but you can find information about lack of basic services in slums on page 67 of the textbook. So I hope that this answers your question about poor facilities or slums. However, if you are able to phrase your question a bit clearly, maybe you can send it to me via the Google form. Alright, moving on. Alright, next we're going to talk about the topic of flooding. Okay, so one of your classmates actually asked, is there any effective mitigation measure or flood recovery method that has worked successfully, which I can probably use in my evaluation paragraphs as evidence? Okay, so in this case, I would actually advise against memorizing uh, only one example. It will actually benefit you if you read widely and you know about what other places are doing or what Singapore is doing in particular. And also another thing to take note is that it depends on the question. So let's say the question asks you about Jakarta, but you only memorize the examples in Singapore, then that doesn't really allow you to talk about the example that you have memorized in your evaluation paragraph. That being said, if you're writing your evaluation paragraphs, please make sure to use the data that you're given. If you are given a story, please use the information in the story to the best of your abilities. Alright? So that being said, take this opportunity to read widely about what different places are doing in order to mitigate the impacts of floods. Alright, moving on. So how do we define the social and economic impacts of flooding? So we actually went through this in class. So when you combine social and economic, you actually call it socio-economic. Okay, so social impacts relates to the well-being of the people. This refers to physical well-being or mental well-being. That is how you define social impacts. For economic impacts, on the other hand, it relates to the production, sale, and consumption of goods and services. So basically, anything that generates money refers to economic impacts. So if you want to talk about a definition of social and economic impacts, you can actually use the one on the screen here in order to define it. Alright, so next comes a question which many of you have actually raised concerns about, and that is about flash floods. Alright, so what are flash floods? So firstly, to explain to you, flash floods are floods which occur suddenly and last for a short period of time. They may also happen unexpectedly, meaning you're going to work and then suddenly there's a flood without warning. So that is an example of a flash flood. They often occur in urban areas due to the large area of impermeable surfaces, which increases surface runoff during intense rainfall, which then leads to channel capacity being exceeded and then leads to the floods. So that is what flash floods are. Okay, so another question which students ask is what causes flash floods? You guys need to understand that generally flash floods are a type of flood. So you have your coastal floods, you have river floods, you have flash floods, right? So it is one type of flood. However, just like any flood, they are caused when channel capacity is exceeded. So theoretically, the main idea behind flooding is that you must understand flooding happens when channel capacity is exceeded. So what can cause channel capacity to be exceeded? So in this case, if you think about it in terms of channel capacity being exceeded, it is actually caused by multiple causes. Multiple possible causes can actually cause flash floods. Heavy rainfall, snow melt, failure of man-made structures, these can all cause flash floods. However, one thing that I need to bring to your attention is that it is not as simple as memorizing something and then vomiting out on your paper. Because let's say you're given a story or an image, for example, the one in the practice paper where the person is in the car and you are asked to identify a cause of flash floods. You need to mention according to the data. So you need to answer according to the data. You need to make sure that your answer goes in line with the data. For example, you can see it in the data. Then you should say the appropriate causes. Okay, so for example, in the example that I just gave you earlier, the man in the car and then people pushing the car, right? So a lot of your classmates actually mentioned about the Bayshore area being a coastal area. So possibly a storm surge could be a cause of the flash floods in that instance. Or even snow melt. Okay, because they give us story about the snow melt, right? So we mentioned about snow melt. Use the data that you are given. Alright, so the next one, the difference between causes of floods and why some cities are more prone to flooding. Okay, so you guys need to understand that the difference between the causes of floods, basically for this question, the answer is this one in red. Okay, so we know that based on what you have learned, snow melt, failure of man-made structures, storm surges, these things happen in different areas. For example, storm surges only happen in coastal areas, and therefore uh, it might be a cause for coastal flooding. However, when it rains, coastal flood areas can also flood. I mean, the areas around the coastal areas can also flood. So it really depends on the data that you are given. All right. So when we're talking about why some cities are more prone to flooding, this one is in your textbook. There are several factors that they explain. For example, poor drainage, impermeable surfaces. These are the factors that result in areas being more prone to flooding. So know the difference between causes as well as why cities are more prone to flooding. Alright, so the next question, what are the ways of reducing flooding impacts? So basically, to reduce flooding impacts, remember the lesson on mitigation measures. Mitigation measures seek to reduce the impact of floods. This includes elevating properties, channel widening, deepening, straightening, and forecasting and warning systems. These are all measures that we've went through in class. So if you are not clear about the different ways to reduce flooding impacts, please refer to your notes, the checklist, as well as other resources, for example, YouTube, in order to search for things such as forecasting and warning and how they work. Can you explain forecasting and warning? Okay, at its core, forecasting and warning is actually a form of disaster preparedness. It's to actually prepare you so that you can anticipate or act appropriately when flooding happens. So it consists of monitoring, predicting, and warning. So there are 3 steps. So through this, when you have forecasting and warning systems, people can anticipate floods and reduce impacts such as death. Because when they know that a flood is going to come, what they can actually do is that they can go to an area that is safer. Again, this is in your mitigation measures worksheet. So all the data is there, all the different steps, monitoring, predicting, and warning are in there. There's a lot of detail in there, so you can find out the nitty-gritty bits in there. All right. Can make a mind map, please? Yes, of course you can make a mind map. So make sure that your mind maps are not too wordy. Mind maps should be concise yet accurate. Remember, if you're simply just copying your textbook onto a mind map, then might as well you read the textbook. Remember, mind maps need to be very concise. Alright, next we talk about geographical investigation as well as answering methods. Alright, so the difference between describe, explain, and identify. Okay, for this I have already provided you a document on how to actually distinguish between these 3 different command words. It is in the instruction sheet of your holiday homework. So in this document, it actually tells you what each command word actually requires. For example, state name identify. It is the easiest command word, usually 1 mark. So you just have to provide me an accurate expression of something. So for example, identify the cause of flooding. What caused the flood? These are very, very simple questions. And then the most challenging question that you will face at this level will probably be your evaluate questions. So what are some possible questions they may ask? What to study? So below here, I have some sample questions that are related to GI. Feel free to pause this video and ask yourself whether you can answer these questions or you know how to answer these questions. Basically, if you don't know how to answer these questions, then you have to study this in your textbook. Which writing format do I use for data pieces? So this question really depends on the type of data. For example, we gave you the framework GAD, right? However, if I get an image of a guy pushing a car, I can't really use GAD. So GAD is more appropriate, for example, maps, for line graphs, for bar graphs, for proportional circle maps. So there isn't really a writing format that I can suggest to you. It really depends on your data that you're given. Alright, the way to answer trend questions, the describing of graphs. Okay, this I actually went through it already. It is in your SLS. Please revisit that lesson. how to use the reference to the question, and how to relate to the question. So basically, just when they ask you to refer to a figure, just make sure you use the information given in the figure. Don't anyhow vomit your own information. Okay, don't add any information, don't delete any information, just use the information. So if the figure shows you a picture of a coast, make sure you mention that you see a coast. Don't tell me that it is a supermarket. Or don't tell me it's a river. Please use the information in the data. Can we have more practice? Smiley face. Yes. I will be uploading sample GI questions for you to try on Google Classroom soon. So answers will be provided too. I will try to make another video to explain to you how the GI questions could actually be done. So just wait and just wait for the notification for that upload to be up. Alright, but it's very good that you guys are asking for more practice. It shows that you are really taking charge of your learning. Alright, so a very popular question also is how to answer evaluations. So this one is a bit lengthy. It cannot be a video on its it cannot be a joint video because it's going to take at least 40 minutes. This video is going to take at least 40 minutes. So I will try to make another video. However, do tune in to that video when it comes out for you to learn how to write your evaluations. So I wish you all the best in your end of the year exams. Please remember to revise. Please remember to have enough rest and take breaks. Therefore, thank you and all the best.